Coming up on this episode of Crime Family. So yeah, this is actually the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. So it's very scary and it's tragic, and like I said, it hits close to home for all of us.
It was super terrifying because I didn't know how bad it was going to get, and then it was just like, it's one of those things I would always remember what I was doing that day.
I didn't know what the hell was going to happen, but it was just like, where's this man going to end up and what the hell is he going to do next?
It's so scary to me that people can just pass as a police officer so easily.
Yeah, and of course your mind is never going, when you see a police officer or you see a police car pull up in your driveway, you're not thinking, oh, it's an imposter. Like, you're going to think, obviously, it is a police officer, so.
And like, this is one of the parts of the case where I'm just like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, terrifying.
Hi everyone, welcome to Crime Family. So this is our season 3 finale. So it's going to be a 2-part finale episode, and I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my 2 sisters Stephanie and Katie, and we do have a special guest for this episode. If you've listened to the podcast back in season 1, you'll remember this guest. So we have Jennifer Knowles here. She's one of my good friends, and she's here to join us for the finale episode. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on the show. We're happy to have you. So for the finale, we're going to be discussing the Nova Scotia mass shooting that happened in April of 2020. I just want to say up front, so this case and the discussion contains intense and upsetting topics such as domestic violence and a mass shooting event, which might be triggering to some listeners, so please use discretion when listening to this episode. And we also wanted to take a moment and dedicate this episode to the memories of those lives lost in the senseless act of mass violence and to their families. Additionally, it is dedicated to the victims of senseless gun violence all over the world, and most recently, the young children killed in the elementary school mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and those killed in the mass shooting in Buffalo, New York, just this past May. Our hearts go out to all the victims and their families, and in the show notes of the episode we will be putting links to various resources to support the families of these victims and where to seek mental health and counseling support as a result of gun violence if needed. So Katie will get us started on discussion about this case.
So yeah, like we said, this is the Nova Scotia mass shooting, and this case is kind of special because it literally is very close to home for all of us. All 4 of us grew up in Nova Scotia, not exactly in the town where this started, but we all have connections to Halifax and Dartmouth, where I used to live, and Steph and Jennifer still live in the area. It does hit close to home. We're just touching the surface, as there's a lot out there, and there's so much more detail than we're able to cover in our 2-part finale. But I'm kind of glad that we didn't cover this when it first came out, because there was a lot of misinformation that came out at the very beginning. So now, over 2 years later, while there's still a lot of questions, at least more of the truth has been uncovered. So yeah, this is actually the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. So it's very scary and it's tragic, and like I said, it hits close to home for all of us.
I think too, just putting it into a little bit of context, for those, I know we have a lot of listeners in the US who might not be necessarily familiar with Nova Scotia, but Nova Scotia is a pretty small Canadian province on the east coast of Canada, and I think it's just surpassed 1 million in population. So it is very small in population and also very small like geographically. So I think I'm Google mapped it out, and you can pretty much drive from like one end to the other, from like Cape Breton to Yarmouth. It's like about 7-hour drive if you drive straight through. So geographically, it's very small. So it just kind of gives you that feeling of like everyone, even though obviously you don't know everyone, it still feels like when these sort of things happen, or if there ever is any type of like event that happens, it's kind of like your first thought is going to like, do I know any of the victims? Just because it is a very small place. So you kind of feel like, that 6 degrees of separation, it feels much less than that in Nova Scotia, even though obviously you don't know everyone. Our small town we grew up in is like only a few thousand people, but just kind of gives you context for this because you never would expect something, like Katie said, it's the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history. So you wouldn't think something like that would happen in a small little place like Nova Scotia. So I just wanted to like kind of give a little bit of context there.
Yeah, and we don't know any of the victims directly, but if we did some digging, we probably know somebody who knows one of the victims or the families. So like that's kind of how close and how small the province really is. So I remember when I first got the news that this was happening, I was sitting in my living room in BC, and even though I was out in BC, of course it still was, terrifying. I first got the notification that there was a shooter in Nova Scotia, and to be honest, I had never heard of Portapique, where this started. But of course I had heard of Wentworth and Enfield and Elmsdale and of course Dartmouth, so I knew all those places, and it was kind of like oh shit, what's happening? So what do you guys remember about how you felt when you first heard about it? And especially like Steph and Jennifer, you guys were in Nova Scotia when it was happening. What were your thoughts?
Well, I remember I was on maternity leave and it was April, so the weather was still not as great, but I remember sitting at home and I remember Nick saying something about the shooter going around, and I'm like, what? And at that time there was no like alert, like notification, like how sometimes you get those like big blasts on your phone, but there was none of that. So I was like, okay, what's going on? Like Nick was like, yeah, there's like somebody shooting, and I'm like, okay. Like, and they were telling everybody to lock their doors, so I like literally locked my doors, locked my windows, even though like I was in Halifax and he was in Truro. It was still like he was in a car, so he could have came to Halifax or where I live in Lower Sackville. So I was pretty scared because I had like a young child at the time, and I'm like, we didn't hear any information. We had no idea where he was or what he was doing. So it was super terrifying because I didn't know how bad it was going to get. And then it was just like, it's one of those things I would always remember what I was doing that day. It's just one of those crazy things. And to this day, I still remember vividly what happened on that day.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing with me. I live right in Dartmouth where he was on his way back. And like social media was just completely blowing up. Facebook, everybody had this post about this man who was on a rampage and started off in Portapique, and it was going towards Truro. And when I saw Truro, I immediately thought of my brother and his family, and it scared me fucking shitless. Like, I didn't know what the hell was going to happen, but it was just like, where's this man going to end up and what the hell is he going to do next, right? Like, yeah, terrifying.
Yeah, it is super scary. I was scared and I was nowhere near it, so I can't imagine how it would have felt for you guys and people that were there. AJ, do you have anything to say about the matter?
Yeah, I didn't live in Nova Scotia at the time, so it doesn't like, I don't have that experience of being in the province, but I just remember hearing about it, and I honestly can't remember. I think of what would have been the next, or like that morning, the first time I heard about it. I think probably on Twitter or social media somewhere, but I remember, yeah, just like being scared for everyone I knew in Nova Scotia because there wasn't a ton of information coming out. Things were blowing up on social media, but I feel like you didn't really know. A lot of it was speculation, so you didn't really know what was happening. You would just get like blasts of like there was an event here and then an event here, so then you're thinking, oh, is it multiple people or what's going on? And so you don't really know where the next sort of where it's going to come from next. I just remember like being scared for obviously like my parents and then like everyone and like Steph and everyone I knew who lived in Nova Scotia. So that's like what I remember from that day.
Yeah, and as we get into this, you'll kind of see that there really wasn't a lot of official notification from the RCMP coming out. So there was probably a lot of speculation from people and like firsthand experiences happening, but there was nothing. The police weren't really being involved in social media that much. So I think that didn't help the situation at all and made everything kind of go more crazy. So there is a lot that is going on in this case, and I'm going to try and stick to the timeline chronologically for the most part, just to try and stay on track. So a lot of this is from the Nighttime podcast, who outlined it very well, and they also have a lot of detailed episodes about it as well. A lot of the information also comes from the Mass Casualty Commission report that came out in February of 2022 about this case. So we're going to discuss the timeline and events as we go, and part 2 will focus more on the police inquiry that is ongoing and kind of all their mistakes and missteps along the way. A little bit about Portapique. It's in Colchester County, Nova Scotia, and it's super small. It has a permanent population that is less than 200 people, probably closer to less than 100 people, I think. In the summer, when it has some of the residents that come to live there just for the summer, is when it gets closer to 200 people. And it has a lot of cottages and kind of like summer homes for people. So one resident named Gabriel Wortman, he had a cottage in Portapique, but he lived most of the time above one of his denture clinics in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, which is, part of the city of Halifax. And he was a denturist, but he had actually wanted to become a police officer when he was younger. And so a little bit about Gabriel Wortman. According to an article by Michael McDonald for CBC News Atlantic, a relative of Gabriel's said that he was raised in a dysfunctional family and he had a reputation of being a lifelong scam artist and opportunist. Gabriel's uncle, named Chris Wortman, was actually a former Mountie, and he says that it didn't surprise him to learn that Gabriel was the one who committed these horrible killings. Chris said that he never thought Gabriel would go on a rampage like this. Like, that wasn't something that was on the top of his mind, but he always thought that maybe he would kill his parents or kill his common-law wife, Lisa Banfield, one day.
And so I just want to say, I remember reading that article too, and that also just struck me very weird that he said that he was like, oh, I just thought he could kill his partner or his parents. Like, it just seems like I don't know. It was just like a very weird thing. Like, I always thought he could do that. It's just kind of weird.
So Gabriel was apparently very abusive towards Lisa, and he cheated on her a lot with anyone that he could, basically. And so he obviously really didn't care about her feelings. Chris says that Gabriel's parents were very strange and bizarre people, and so that's kind of how Gabriel turned out as well. And because of that, he really didn't ever have a lot of friends. Chris was the last family member of Gabriel's to be associated with him, but he eventually became estranged from him as well. He said he just kind of had this feeling that he had to cut ties from him, and so Gabriel was completely isolated from the rest of his family, eventually. So like I mentioned, Gabriel had wanted to be a police officer, but he never actually did become one. But he still did collect a lot of police paraphernalia. He had police uniforms, and he even had former police, like RCMP vehicles, which in Nova Scotia are white Ford Tauruses, and you can buy them at auctions, but they're completely stripped down of all the police equipment, and of course all the decals and the lights and everything would be taken out of the vehicle, and so it would just be like a plain white car. And he actually had a couple of these in his possession, but he was able to meticulously recreate an RCMP lookalike vehicle that was virtually indistinguishable from the real one. And so he took a lot of time in getting the right decorations, the right symbols to make his car look exactly like a real one. I think he even had the flashing lights and all that kind of stuff. So you can see that he was very prepared for this attack that he was about to go on. And maybe he didn't plan it out completely, but just the fact that he had planned so meticulously the replication of this vehicle, you can tell that he had put some thought into what he was going to do with that car. And he also collected firearms, and he didn't have a license to own any or most of them. So yeah, that's a little bit about Gabriel. It's a little bit of background. So this whole story starts on April 18th of 2020. And this was Gabriel and his common-law wife Lisa's 19th anniversary. And so this is 2020, and this is when COVID first was getting serious in Nova Scotia, and the lockdowns were starting to happen. And so that may have been a factor into what was going on inside Gabriel's head. Maybe it was affecting him stress-wise or paranoia. Maybe this was just something else that was built onto some of the issues that he was already having. So the Nighttime podcast recounts Lisa's telling of that night, and she says that her and Gabriel were FaceTiming with one of their friends from Maine, and that friend had made a comment because they were talking about how the next year for their 20th anniversary, they wanted to do a formal commitment ceremony, Lisa and Gabriel, and their friend from Maine said, no, don't do it, run. And for whatever reason, she said that, but this made Lisa really upset, and she kind of just left the conversation. But then she came back and she wanted to explain that she wasn't angry at Gabriel. She was angry at her friend for making that comment. But for whatever reason, this just triggered something in Gabriel, and this is where he completely loses his shit. Lisa went to go to bed, and Gabriel follows her into the bedroom, and he rips her out of the bed, and he keeps saying, "It's done, Lisa. It's done." He tied her hands behind her back, and he starts to pour gasoline all over the floors. He lit the house on fire, and he drags Lisa out to another building that was on the property, and he's telling her that he's going to burn everything down, and then they're going to head to Halifax. So yeah, they're in Portapique this time. So he locked her in the back of this replica police car that he had, and by this time he's dressed in his police uniform that he had, and he's starting to load up the back of the car with a bunch of his firearms that he had. And he tried to put Lisa in handcuffs, and she's struggling. But yeah, she is in the back of the car, and she's able to slip out through, I guess he had that partition in the back of the car that you would see in a police car from between the front and the back seats. And she was apparently able to slip through the window in that, get into the front seat, unlock the front door of the car, and run into the woods barefoot. And so this all happened before 10 p.m. that night. So this is April. 10 p.m., it's completely dark, it's super cold, but she runs into the woods bare feet without any coat or anything. Gabriel doesn't really waste any time going after her. He just kind of loads up the car and heads off. So his first stop, he travels down the road to his neighbor's house named Greg and Jamie Blair, and they live with their 2 children. One of their children sees the police car, Gabriel, pull into their driveway, and Greg was actually outside. Greg was shot, and the kids and Jamie hear the gunshots. Jamie told the kids to go hide in her room, and they hide under the bed while she calls 911 around 10:01 p.m. And she knew who the shooter was, and she knew that was her neighbor, and she told the dispatcher on the other end of the phone that he was driving a police car. And they can hear Gabriel entering the house, and Jamie was in the room with her kids, but she was like bracing herself up against the door frame so that he couldn't get in, and he shoots through the door, and then he comes in and kills Jamie in front of the kids. They're under the bed though, but we'll never know, but we don't think that he actually saw the kids or knew that they were in there, because he leaves without doing anything to them. I'm going to play a few 911 calls throughout this episode, and just a warning, there are some very disturbing and distressful parts. And so this first 911 call is Jamie's call into the police department. So here it is.
911, what is your emergency? Sorry, I can't make out what you're saying.
My neighbor.
Yeah?
Is crying out, I think he shot my husband.
You think your husband's been shot?
Yes.
Okay, do you have a home phone or landline to that location? Where are you?
Well, I know.
What's the civic address?
Orchard Beach Drive in Portapique.
Orchard Beach? Is your husband injured?
I don't know. I'm on the deck. I don't know what the fuck is going on. There's a police car in the fucking driveway.
There's police cars in the driveway?
There are a police car, but he drives. He's a denturist and he drives like
Okay, sorry. Did you say there were police cars in your driveway?
There is an RC, is just a label RCMP. It's not a
Orchard Beach. Listen, you're Orchard Beach Drive in Portapique, Colchester County?
Yes.
You called from 902.
Yes.
Is your husband injured?
I don't know.
Can you see him?
He was 6 feet
After Jamie is shot, which is where the 911 call ends, Gabriel sets the house on fire, and the two kids that were hiding under the bed, they had moved into the closet, and once they hear the fire alarm going off in the house, they are able to sneak out and run next door to their neighbors, where they also call 911, and they talk to the dispatchers, and they're explaining the situation, and again, they said the man who shot their parents and set their house on fire left in a police car, and the kid that's on the phone, he even says that there was lights and everything on the police car. Gabriel had also killed the owner of that home too, which was Lisa McCulley. They didn't know that at the time that they were making this second 911 call, because she had gone out to see what was happening over next door, and she was shot while she was going to check on her neighbors. So here's a portion of that 911 call. Again, it's, kind of distressful.
Hello?
There is a crazy man, and he's burning down his own garage. He came over to our house, killed both our parents, and are burning down our house.
Matt, where are you at right now? Do you know the address?
Yes, we are at our neighbor's house. In between, we are at, what's their address?
Are you in Portapic?
Yes, Portapic.
Okay.
Okay,
Miss, I understand. We've already got calls in for this area there. You said there's a fire there now?
Yes, there's
okay.
a huge fire.
Do you know which house you're at there in Portapic?
Orchard Beach Road.
Orchard Beach Road?
Orchard Beach Drive. So, you know
okay.
where Portapic Beach Drive is?
Yeah.
Portapic Drive is?
Yeah.
Right in there, and then you take a left on the first one.
Okay, is that where the fire is?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, just stay on the phone for me, okay?
That's where we are.
Miss?
And the fire's right across.
The fire's across the street?
Yes.
So at...
Yes. Wait. Orchard Beach Road.
That's where you're at right now?
Yes.
Okay, where is the fire at? Is it a street?
Yes, it's right across the street from us. Our house,
okay.
and my little brother's house is Orchard Beach Drive, right beside it.
Okay, and the fire's at...
He came in, he shot my father 10 times.
Okay.
My mom was calling, and he came in and he killed her.
Okay, where is she at? Is she still in the house?
She's dead in her room.
In her room, okay.
And she is burning. Their house is on fire.
Okay, where's the guy who did this?
We don't know. He pulled out of the driveway and left.
Do you see what kind of vehicle?
It was a police car. I couldn't find the license.
Okay. Did you see anything else about the vehicle? You said it was a police car?
Yes, it was.
It was?
A police car.
Okay. All right, so we've got police on the way there for the other part of this. I'm just going to put you in contact with fire, okay? I have you at Orchard Beach Drive in Portapic.
And they shot our dog, and half of our dog is missing.
Okay. Orchard Beach Drive in Portapic, Colchester County, right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a cell phone number or a number that we can get to?
No. What's your phone number? I don't have a We don't have one. Her mom went over there and she hasn't came back.
Okay.
We don't know where our little brothers are. They went out
okay.
tonight, I guess.
All right. But you don't have a phone number or anything?
No, we don't.
Okay. All right. Just stay on the phone for me, okay? I'm gonna put you through the fire for a second, okay?
Okay.
It's 911 Truro for Bass River Fire. Yeah. All right. So we've got a fire across the street from Orchard Beach Drive in Portapic, Colchester County. Miss, just let me talk to him for a second, okay? Orchard Beach Drive and where? In Portapic, Colchester County. She doesn't have a callback number. There was an incident there with a shooting and everything involved, so there are police and ambulance going there as well, but the house was also lit on fire. Miss, just one moment, please. Okay, the secure for fire to go in? Not at this point. We're still getting all of the other resources there. Call me back when it's secure that we can send fire over. Okay, perfect. All right, we'll do. Thanks for our thanks. Bye. Hi, ma'am. Miss, you still there?
Sir, it's a sir.
Okay, just 1 second, okay? I'm going to put you through to fire, or to police. 1 second, okay? All right. Hello? RCMP? Hi.
So one thing to think about with this 911 call is that there are 4 kids in this house now and no adults. So the 2 McCulley children and the 2 Blair children that had run over there after their parents were shot. And so you don't hear the full 911 call, but there are other transcripts out there. The RCMP do take precautions to protect the kids because they know that there are no parents there. They tell them to hide in the basement. They give them a safe word, which is pineapple. So the kids know when it's actually the police coming back for them, and then it's safe to come out. And eventually all 4 kids are driven in Lisa McCulley's vehicle to another location. So it's just hectic. There's so much going on. So a few minutes later, now it's 10:22 p.m., there's another 911 call comes in, and this comes in from Andrew and Kate McDonald, who were home and saw the fires out of their window from their house, and they get in their car and decide to go see what's going on. So Andrew was calling about the fires. They're now in the car driving down the street, and he sees Gabriel dressed as a police officer, and Andrew stops to talk to him because he sees him coming up the driveway, and Gabriel points his gun at Andrew and shoots him while they're sitting in the car talking to 911. So we're going to play Andrew's 911 call as well. This one I think is the most distressing. You can hear the gunshots and the screaming. So we'll play that one for you as well.
911, what is your emergency? I'm calling from Portapic, and there's a house on fire down the road from our house. I just didn't know if somebody called already. Yeah, so you can see the house on fire? Yeah. What's the address? I don't know the exact address. It's on Orchard Beach Road. Okay. Yeah, we've got a few calls there. So Orchard Beach Road in Portapic, Colchester County? Yeah. 902-3. Yeah. And you see the house on fire? Yeah, we just drove down the road to check it out, but yeah, it's like a big garage. It's one of our neighbors, so he's probably not there. Okay, just one moment then. I'm just going to connect you to fire to make sure, okay? Just one moment. Yeah. Fire dispatch? 910 calling for a fire call for Bass River Fire. Yes. You've got the call there. We believe it's Orchard. Oh my God. Yeah, it should be close to that area, Orchard Beach Drive in Portapic, Colchester County. But we don't have there's another house on fire here. Yeah, he's on the road there and you can see. Do you see 2 houses on fire? Yeah, we just drove by another house and their whole kitchen's on fire. Okay, is there a police officer in the driveway?
RCMP, are you aware the situation that's going on that road?
Yeah, just he's saying there's 2 houses now on fire, so just thought we'd update you there.
Okay.
And he's at 902. The 2 houses beside each other, sir? No, they're down the road. Down the road from each other?
What's the zip?
Yeah, and then the police officer parked at this driveway, but I don't know what's he's coming around. I don't know if he's going to talk to me or what.
Is it safe for that person to be on that road right now?
Fire, so you're aware there's possibly a second fire? Their neighbor came and just shot me in the arm.
Please help us. 911?
So Andrew is shot, but he's only shot in the arm, so he's able to speed away, and Gabriel is chasing after them in his police car. There are other witnesses that report seeing 3 vehicles going at a high speed down the road, and it turns out to be that it's Andrew and Kate in their car, Gabriel in his car, and then there's another car, which turns out to be the family, the Falkland family, and they were just arriving on their way back from a trip to Truro, and so for whatever reason, they're also speeding down the road. So David Falkland says that he remembers seeing a police car in the driveway of another residence that was on fire, and this was the Galechin residence, and David and his family never came into contact with Gabriel, so they were not harmed and were able just to drive home. Yeah, as you can tell, there's so much happening in such a short time. And from the time when Gabriel first started, so after Lisa escaped into the woods and when the police first arrived on scene, This is about 30 minutes have gone by, and throughout this time, like, confirmed that there was at least 13 people had been shot and killed. And we don't have details about every single one of them because there's not a lot out there or known kind of about the timelines or, you know, the police activity during all this. So there really is still a lot up in the air. What do you guys think so far?
Yeah, it's crazy to think, like, just the short window, because like you said, it started between the time it started and like up to now where we are in the timeline. Like, it's a very short window. And so the fact that one person could just, it is just crazy in this like small little rural area that this one man could kill 13 people in that short amount of time. And I remember the last time I visited Nova Scotia when I was home, like, we actually ended up going on a drive, and we ended up, like, we just went to the area where this happened. And I remember, like, we drove down, I think it was, what's the name of the Porter Peak Road, or Old Porter Peak Road or something. I remember driving down, and like there was a sign. There was like a fork in the road, but there was a sign, you know, saying, "Please respect the privacy of the families." Like, you couldn't go down this one road where that was where like the house had burned down and stuff. So it just felt very eerie being in there. And like when you were like telling this timeline, I just kind of pictured the roads and kind of the layout of it, and it's just so scary just even hearing you say it back. I couldn't even imagine the people who were there witnessing it or in the area at the time.
What I find scary, the most scary part of this whole thing, is how he looked like a police officer. Like, I mean, I know people knew who he was, but like, if you were just driving by him and you didn't know who he was, you would think he was a police officer. Police officers are supposed to be approachable, they're supposed to be nice and kind. Like, it's so scary to me that like that's how he dressed, and people weren't really too concerned, because like when that guy came out of his house to see why the police officer was in his driveway and he just shoots him. Like, it's so scary to me that people can just pass as a police officer so easily. Yeah,
and of course your mind was never going, you know, when you see a police officer or you see a police car pull up in your driveway, you're not thinking, oh, it's an imposter. Like, you're going to think, obviously, it is a police officer. So the fact that Gabriel himself probably knew that, and that's how he knew he was going to be able to do this, in large part because he kind of had the guise of the police vehicle and all of that stuff. So it's just very scary.
Yeah, that's honestly terrifying. And I think one of the scariest things about this whole situation is like, are the 911 calls. I don't understand how those kids stayed so calm. Like, it kind of blows my mind. Like, if I was a kid and I was in that situation, I don't know if I would ever be able to stay that calm on the phone. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, because when he says, like, the 911 dispatcher says, "Oh, where's your dad? Oh, he's laying down in the dirt, and or my mom's upstairs dead." Like, he doesn't even like flinch. He's just super calm about it. But I think there's so much going on in that moment that he's just trying to get help as fast as he can. And if he spoke really quickly or was really frantic, it would be harder for the dispatcher to understand what he was trying to say. So
I don't even know. I mean, that's a good point, but I don't even know if, as a child, you even have that much sort of forethought of like, I need to remain calm. I feel like maybe he was just so traumatized and just couldn't understand what was happening, and it's just, I don't know. It's just crazy to me that, yeah, that struck me too, that the kids were very calm.
It could have been just a full state of shock too. Like, if I was in shock like that, I mean, I wouldn't know what to do in this situation, but you know, everybody reacts differently.
Yeah. It is amazing how the kid is really able to talk to the police officers that calmly. And another detail that I didn't mention was the phone that he's talking to the police on is his father's phone. He had to go to his father's dead body and get the cell phone out of his pocket, and then they ran across the street. So, I mean, just the foresight to be like, I need to get this phone so I can call and get help, and then run over to his neighbors. Like, that's just crazy. Like, this kid is actually super amazing for even not flipping out about that. And he's like, yeah, both my parents are dead. My house is on fire. And I had to fish this phone out of my dead dad's pocket. Like, my God. So yeah, super traumatizing for sure. So police show up on the scene shortly after all those 911 calls come in, around 10:30 p.m. And they set up roadblocks to try and trap Gabriel. So if you remember when you were listening to those phone calls, like especially Andrew and Kate. They say who it is. They say it's Gabe. It's my neighbor Gabe. He's driving a police car. So they should be aware at this point of who at least they think it is, and that he's driving a police car. And so they block off both ends of the road. So of course Porta Peak is like this little place, and there's only like one main road, so they just block off both ends basically. However, there was a blueberry field that had a road through it that would allow anyone going down that road to bypass these roadblocks. And according to Elizabeth McMillan, reporting for CBC News, one of the constables on the scene, the fourth one to arrive on scene that night, her name was Constable Vicky Colford. She was talking to the shooting victims, Andrew and his wife Kate, and they both told her that there was a potential other way out down that Blueberry Field Road. And Colford actually said over the radio, quote, "If you guys want to have a look at the map, we're being told there's a road, kind of a road that someone could come out before here, if you know the roads well." End quote. But then later it comes out that Colford said she had no recollection of saying that over the radio, and the three other senior officers that were there on scene do not remember hearing it over their radio either. And they only know that this happened when they're reviewing the inquiry documents later on, that there was a record of this happening. And so she said it, doesn't remember it. Three other officers didn't hear it on their radio. So, I mean, everyone's maybe just so panicked, so in shock, they're not even listening to themselves or their radios, which is a huge, huge deal.
I question, did they really not hear it, or do they are just saying that now during the inquiry because of all the mistakes they made?
I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll never know if they actually heard it. Or maybe they did hear it, but they just weren't really paying attention because, you know, there was so much going on. She said she doesn't even remember saying it, which is another kind of weird thing. Maybe, I guess, in their defense, like, she was saying that she was talking to the victims who were frantic because, you know, Andrew had just been shot, and she was kind of trying to talk to them about the situation, and she said that she felt like a sitting duck. Like, she was just concerned that they were going to get ambushed, that Gabriel was going to come up, sneak up behind them, and just kind of ambush them. So she said she just felt like a sitting duck sitting there and was just constantly looking around every vehicle that pulled up. She was just terrified of who might be in it. So I can see why maybe she wasn't paying complete attention to maybe what was everything else that was going on. But I mean, still, that's 4 people that somehow missed that whole communication.
But aren't you, like, trained in situations like that? Like, isn't that part of your training to be able, you know what I mean? Because they are going to, you know, as a police, because there's a police officer that said that, or an RCMP officer, right?
Yep. She said it over their, like, little radio they have.
Yeah, so I feel like part of you're going to be in those types of situations, maybe not comparable to that, but intense situations. And I know it's a small community, so maybe they're not as used to it, but I still feel like you kind of should sort of be trained to be able to react appropriately in intense and frightening situations. But again, I don't know, like, I guess the points that you made were right. Like, I guess at that point, maybe you're running on adrenaline and you're not going to remember every little small detail or every little thing you say, but
but also, like, you're also trained to, like, look at every avenue and every, like, if someone says there's a person in the basement, you're gonna go check that person. You don't just say, if you want to look at this area, you can. It's like, well, you're trained. If someone's telling you something and it could be important, you go look to see, because chances are it could be something that's worth looking at. So you don't just, like, I don't know, you don't just brush it off. Like, if you want to go look at it, you can, but if not, then whatever. But that's just my opinion anyway.
I'm trying to play not devil's advocate, but also too, I feel like it's hard because we're sitting here, you know, it's after the fact, knowing what happened and knowing all the horrible things that he did before that, and like we will do later. So it's hard to be like, how could you in that moment not think that? But I guess at the time they're just thinking like it's, you know, one, I don't know. You're not thinking that it's going to be on this massive scale that it ended up being. You might think it's a small, isolated, yeah, there's like 2 fires, but I don't know. I just think it's also hard to put ourselves in their minds because we're thinking of it after the fact. But I don't want to go too easy on them either, because I do think that they fucked up in many, many ways. That's kind of not acceptable.
yeah, like, we have the benefit of hindsight here, and it's super easy for us to judge, because, I mean, we're not RCMP officers, we don't know their training, and you can just imagine how stressful it would have been regardless of your status, RCMP or not. So, and I think another point to make is at this early stage, even though they've been told multiple times that it was an RCMP car, I don't think that they're fully convinced that it was a full-on replica. They might have thought that it was mistaken for an RCMP vehicle because they said that they know that Gabriel had those cars and collected those white sedans, but like nobody ever saw that he had a full-on completed car. So they might just be thinking that it's being mistaken for an RCMP car. Also, what's fresh in everyone's mind at this point is the Moncton shooting that happened kind of recently at this point. And they're being told not to put themselves in a situation where they can be ambushed. So not to like block themselves in where somebody could come up in front of them and they have no way out. So I think all of this is kind of fresh in their mind that they don't want to get stuck in a situation like the Moncton shooting because, you know, multiple officers were killed in that. So it's very stressful. There's lots of things at play here.
Yeah, and also I don't know if you said, but I feel like we do have a lot of American listeners or people who aren't in Canada. So RCMP is Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's just our version of the police. If anyone's wondering, we're saying RCMP. So just think of like a police car. When we say RCMP vehicle, it's like a police car that's
right.
You know, decked out like a police car. Yeah. So I don't know if you said that, but I just wanted to.
No,
sure.
I didn't.
Okay.
So there's also speculation, and this comes up in the Nighttime podcast, that Gabriel may not have even needed to take that back road through the blueberry field, that he could have just driven right past the roadblocks in his police car, because at this point, like I said, they weren't completely sure that it was an RCMP vehicle. So I don't know if this is true or if this is just speculation, but it was brought up. He could have just driven past everybody. So at this point, the RCMP did start evacuating some of the residents in that area on that same night when they couldn't find Gabriel. And despite the carnage that he had left behind already, like it hadn't even been a couple hours, there's like burning buildings, there's dead bodies. The police only warned the public that there was a firearms complaint in the Portapique area and that the residents should lock their doors. So that's all they said. They didn't mention anything about actual murders and that this guy might be in an RCMP vehicle. They just said there was a firearms complaint. And they did this via Twitter, which has been ripped apart by everybody, I think, that talks about this case. Because, I mean, I don't think a lot of people looked at Twitter for emergency updates. Like, I don't even use Twitter, so if something was happening in my area and Twitter was the only way that they were notifying people, like, I wouldn't have a clue what was going on. And so this was at 11:32 p.m. when they updated Twitter, as their only form of update.
Well, and that's the one thing, too, that I can't even wrap my head around. I mean, yeah, we have the benefit of hindsight, but I can't even imagine at the time how they could think that putting it on Twitter was enough. Like, to me, I can't even think of why they would even assume that Twitter was the go-to way. Like, we have those alert systems for a reason or some other way. They have to understand that not everyone has Twitter, and even if you do have Twitter, like, not everyone's going to be on it at 11 p.m. at night to be aware, you know? I just think it's a very weird decision to make in the moment.
Yeah, that might be their way that they notify the public about everything, though, and this was just another thing that they were using Twitter for. But a good point that was also brought up in the Nighttime podcast was, like, this Portapique is really out in the middle of nowhere, and so a lot of people probably didn't even have stable Wi-Fi to go onto Twitter, even if they wanted to. So, I mean, it's like, even if they knew Twitter was where they had to go, they probably couldn't even get there very easily. So it just was not a good idea. But I mean, this is still only a couple hours into this whole rampage. Because that was 11:32 p.m. that they sent that Twitter update. Yeah, so like I was saying, they didn't mention anything that he could be potentially driving a car that looked like a police vehicle. Like, they didn't have to say it was a full-on RCMP car, but they didn't even say anything about what he was driving. Obviously, the roadblocks that they had set up had failed, and around 11:12 p.m. on April 18th, later they find this out, Gabriel is seen on security footage, that is obtained later. He's pulling into a garage parking lot in Debert, which is a nearby town, and this is where he spends the night in his car. So he has gotten out of the area, but the police roadblocks are still there, hoping that they're going to find him. The police are looking into the speculation that he could have a stolen police vehicle, but they do confirm that it is not one of their cars that has been stolen because all of their RCMP cruisers are all accounted for. And so they're, at this point still, probably not thinking that it's an exact replica and that maybe people are just mistaking it for a police car. And they did find out that he did have a white Ford Taurus that had a band of reflective tape down the side. So they were thinking that maybe, since it was super dark outside, maybe if people saw this in their driveway, they might think it was a police car. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but that's what they were thinking.
And that kind of makes sense. Like you were saying before, how similar it was to an RCMP car. Like you would never think that somebody would be able to pull it off to look exactly like it. So you are going to think, oh, they're saying it's an RCMP car. It must just be, like you said, that white car with like the thing down the side. It's like, oh, that must be what they thought was an RCMP vehicle. Like you're not going to think that it's that close of a replica that it actually was.
Yeah, and when you're listening to those 911 calls, the people say it's a police car, but then some of them, like the dispatchers are like, is it a police car? And they're like, well, it looks like a police car. It's like, yeah, I think it is. So like they're not 100% saying it is a police car. Sometimes they kind of backtrack, so yeah. But
Jamie does say in that 911 call, she does say that, you know, he's a denturist, he drives RCMP vehicles. Like she does try to make that clear. But I guess either the dispatcher didn't hear that or...
But yeah, and the dispatcher kind of mistakes it for, also there's RCMP cars in your driveway. And she's saying, yes, but it's him driving that car. And she said, oh, did you say that there's an RCMP car in your driveway? Like they're like still not cluing into what's actually happening. So like there's definitely just miscommunication about what's happening.
Yeah, she probably thought like, oh, you mean like the RCMP are there right now responding to this call.
Yeah, when really she was saying there's an RCMP car, but it's not the RCMP.
And also it was a little bit, there was like parts that were like kind of the audio was unclear. I don't know if that was just that version that we listened to or if that's how it actually was. Like maybe the reception wasn't great. Because there were a few like words that were cut off or something. So I didn't know. Like it also wasn't super clear either what she was saying because there were a few words that just kind of got lost. But maybe that was just our like shitty version that we listened to. I don't know if that was the real, you know, if that was the actual, how it sounded in the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of like inaudibles and some stuff is cut out. You can look at the transcripts. I haven't done that. They might be clearer. Okay, so like I was saying, they were thinking that maybe that white car with a strip down the side could be what people were mistaking the car for. But at 1:54 a.m. on April 19th, they did find that vehicle parked in a parking lot and there was snow on top of it, which was undisturbed. So they knew that it had been sitting there for a while and that wasn't the car being used. So there's another hint that it wasn't just being mistaken for this car because it wasn't the one he was driving. So at around 5:30 a.m. on April 19th, Gabriel is on the move again. He leaves that parking lot in DeBert and he heads to the small town of Wentworth. And he gets to the home of his next victims, who are actually some of his friends, Alana Jenkins and Sean McLean. They were both killed in their house, and the house was set on fire. No one was able to call 911 during this attack, so neither of the residents in the house, they were probably sleeping at the time of the attack, is what I'm assuming, so neither of them were able to call 911. Both were killed, so Gabriel, again, was able to kind of slip out of there undetected. So now it's been almost 9 hours since this whole thing started, and Lisa, who's Gabriel's partner, finally emerges from the woods where she was hiding. It's about 6:30 when she finally comes out and goes to a neighbor's house and calls 911, and they go out there and talk to her. And this is when she actually tells them straight up that Gabriel had an exact replica of an RCMP vehicle, and he was dressed in the RCMP uniform, and he was loading up that car with firearms the last time she saw him. And so 7:30 a.m. on April 19th, the police have further confirmation that he is driving an RCMP vehicle, but they still didn't warn the public about it. They didn't tell the public that there's some madman on a rampage in an RCMP car, which still blows my mind. I'm not sure why they just wouldn't say anything.
I know, it makes me so angry and annoyed. I can't understand. I really don't understand why they wouldn't have at that point. What, were they afraid of confirming it for some reason? Like they didn't want, I don't know, but they knew it was true. They knew that was the information. So why they wouldn't put that out there at that moment is just, I don't know.
I know. I feel like they're trying to protect themselves, be like, oh, we don't want people to know that there's a car out there that looks like ours for some reason. Like, that's all I can think of, because I don't understand why they wouldn't warn people about it. Yeah, so, I mean, at this point, the police should know that Gabriel's no longer in the area. Because, I mean, it's such a small little community. There's just that two roads out, and they can't find him, and they don't see his car anywhere. So they must know that he's escaped, but they don't warn the public that he may be on the loose. They did make another tweet, though, that there was an active shooter in Portapique. So they're now saying that there's an active shooter in Portapique after he's already been gone for hours. And they did notify police stations across the province to be on the lookout for Gabriel, and they told them that he was in a police vehicle. So they knew he was probably out there in a police vehicle, not in Portapique, but they didn't warn the public that he had left the Portapique area at this point. 8:54 a.m., they tweet again that they know who the shooter is, and they release his photo to the public, and they release the names of some of his victims, but they still don't warn the public about the police car. So it's like, it doesn't matter that the people know what he looks like, because as soon as, like we were saying before, you see an RCMP vehicle, you're gonna feel safe and trust the person in that car. So it just doesn't seem like they care that much about this for some reason. So Gabriel leaves the home of Alana and Sean around 9:30, so he spends a couple hours at their house. He sets it on fire, and when their neighbor Tom Bagley comes out because he sees the fire, he tries to help because Tom Bagley is a retired firefighter, and sadly Gabriel sees him and shoots him as well, so he dies. 9:32 a.m. is when the next 911 call comes in from another neighbor about the fire and the shooting that she mentions seeing. So I guess she saw what was going on. 9:35 a.m., another 911 call comes in, and this caller says that she saw a police car leaving the scene of the fire, and she also reports seeing another one of her neighbors named Lillian Hislop on the side of the road just laying there not moving. So 9:47 a.m., Corporal Peterson sees Gabriel driving past him while he is responding to these 911 calls, and he actually recognizes Gabriel and calls in to confirm that he sees him. Meanwhile, Gabriel goes to another home of someone he knows, and he knocks on the door and is telling them that it's the police. But before he had got there, they were looking out the window, and they actually see him, and they recognize that it's Gabriel. And so they call 911, and fortunately for them, he leaves without getting in their house. But again, he escapes before the police get there. Now it's 10:02 a.m., and there's another 911 call that comes in from a woman who was talking on the phone with her friend named Heather O'Brien. And while they were talking, Heather tells her that she heard gunshots and she saw a police vehicle moments before she starts screaming, and then the call ends. So Heather was also shot by Gabriel in her car. Finally, at this point, is when the police warn the public about the replica police car that Gabriel is driving. It's still only via Twitter, though, and they give kind of an explanation of what makes this car a little bit different than a real police vehicle. They point to the numbers on the back of the car, which don't match any of the actual RCMP vehicles. So they're saying if you see that number on the back of the car, then that's the fake one. So, I mean, at least they're telling them, but this is like 12 hours later at this point.
I mean, I guess then that's all that, they can put out the number, which is good, but I guess realistically, who's going to get a good look at the number necessarily on the car, Like, I don't know. I feel like, I guess that's like the only way to like sort of identify it from other RCMP cars, but I feel like, if the car's pulling up next to you or, you see it from a distance, you're not necessarily going to see the number on the side necessarily. So even that's kind of hard to, determine.
By the time you can see what that number is, they're already right beside you.
Yeah, like you're only going to see it when you're really close to it, and if you're really close to it, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I still can't wrap my head around how they just didn't alert the public about the vehicle, like, only until like 12 hours after the fact. But by that time, it was almost too late because of the damage that had already been done. Like, I don't know why they just didn't alert the public. I feel like this could have been a better way of alerting the public.
I mean, we literally have like national alerts or like alert things on your phone for a reason. Those Amber alerts that you get on your phone, it's designed for situations like this. So the fact that they're not even using that in this situation is really crazy to me.
Yeah, I want to say that maybe they didn't know the severity of the situation, but they totally did at this point. There was like 13 people already dead, and they knew that he was in a police car, so they knew it had to get worse from here. So I don't know what their excuse is. So maybe this will come out in the public inquiry about why they fucked up so bad. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, some of the Portapique residents were actually evacuated early on, and they were staying at the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall. And clearly by this point, the police had figured out that Gabriel is continuing on his spree, and it's just chaotic, of course. And like, this is the part, one of the parts of the case where I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? Like, it's 10:22 a.m. in the morning. 2 RCMP officers pull up to this fire hall, and they get out of their car, they take cover in a ditch, and they just open fire on an officer that was standing outside this fire hall. This was an actual RCMP officer. He didn't get hurt, nobody else got hurt miraculously, but there's no explanation on what was happening and why they just opened fire on this fire hall. Like, what? People are just like panicking, and they saw a police guy and they just started shooting. Like, it doesn't make any sense. They're just making the situation worse.
I remember first reading about that, and I was so fucking pissed off because the 2 police officers that were open fire, they didn't even go and check on anybody that like, they could have shot and killed somebody just out of pure spite of thinking that it was Gabriel Wortman. Like, that's so fucked up.
I know, it really is. Like, this is where those people that were being evacuated were being held, and these police are open fire on the fucking building, and then they just like, oh, whoops, that's not him, and take off. Like, what the hell? I don't know.
I know, it's like such a shit show, I feel, on every level. It's just like incompetent after incompetence. It's so crazy. And like, that story of the fire hall is just, it's like embarrassing, honestly.
It really is. It's like they definitely like totally saw this one police officer randomly, completely panicked, and just decided to try and kill him. Can you imagine if they would have killed him? Like, Jesus. I
know, it could have been so much worse. Like, you know, they're lucky they didn't kill someone.
Yeah, or killed one of the evacuees inside that building. Like, Jesus Christ. It could have been a lot worse. But, like, that was totally senseless. Doesn't make any sense still. Now, about 20 minutes after this happens, at 10:42 a.m., Gabriel is spotted on Highway 2 in Brookfield. So after hearing this update, Constable Heidi Stevenson, she radios her fellow Constable Morrison, and she tells him that she is going to meet him at the checkpoint where he is at. So they're still everyone's on the lookout for Gabriel. They have gotten this info that he's on Highway 2 in their area, so she's ready to meet Morrison out there to try and get him. So Officer Morrison, he sees an RCMP vehicle traveling towards him, and Morrison radios Heidi asking if that's her coming towards him. And Heidi Stevenson confirms that yes, it's her because she's traveling towards him. But it turns out that actually Gabriel, who happened to be traveling the same way, was just a little bit ahead of her, and he pulls up to Morrison and he just starts shooting at him through the window. Morrison is actually able to escape, and even though he's shot, he's able to drive himself out of the situation. But Stevenson encounters Gabriel on the road, and Gabriel actually has one of those things that some police SUVs have, like I forget what they're called, the things they put on the front of their grills so that they can ram people, and so that it protects them from people trying to ram them. So the standard sedan RCMP vehicles don't have that, but his actually did have it, so he equipped his with that. Gabriel did. And so he was able to ram Stevenson's vehicle and push her kind of off the road. She shoots at him multiple times, but he shoots back and unfortunately kills her, and he gets out of the car and gets her gun away from her. Seeing the accident between 2 police cars, a good Samaritan named Joey Weber pulls over to try and see if he can help, and he ends up being shot and killed by Gabriel as well. Gabriel had put him in the back of his police car, kills him, and then he sets the police car on fire with Joey in the back. So I mean, it's just escalating and escalating as we go on. Now with his police car on fire, Gabriel steals Joey's car, so now he's in a different vehicle than he started out in. And now it's 11:06 a.m. and the police update Twitter with the new vehicle information. They figure out what has happened pretty quickly. They say that he was coming from Brookfield, but that's actually wrong. He was actually headed in the opposite direction. So instead of heading out of Brookfield, he was heading to Shubenacadie, which is like the opposite end of opposite way on the highway. So he arrived at a woman named Gina Gollay's house, and she knew Gabriel because she was another dentist in the area. She was kind of scared, like she knew what was happening and felt that maybe he was going to come and see her. She had called her family to come to her house and be with her because she was afraid that he was going to come to her house, and she was right. But Gabriel gets there before her family gets there. He breaks in and chases her around her house and actually kills her before her family shows up. He changes his clothes at this point, so he's not in the police uniform anymore. He's in civilian clothes, and he steals her car. So now he's in a different car. Gina's family does show up a little bit after Gabriel has left, and they call 911 again. So they're still on his trail a little bit closer, but they've still missed him again. At this point, he's in Gina's car, and her car hardly has any gas. And so it's speculated that, or known, that Gabriel was on his way to Halifax. So he wasn't going to make it in that car, so he had to pull over and get some gas somewhere. So he pulls into a gas station in Elmsdale, and there just happens to be a police vehicle in the spot beside him, getting gas as well. And they're just watching him struggle, because he pulls into the gas station spot on the wrong side of where the actual gas tank is. And so he tries to pull the pump all the way like around or on top of his car to the other side to try and get the gas pump in. And it doesn't reach, and he gets frustrated, just puts the gas pump back and drives away. And so he goes to the next gas station, which is the Big Stop gas station in Enfield. And he arrives there at 11:26 a.m. And I mean, somebody was being vigilant, because I feel like the police saw him, figured out who he was, and maybe warned the police up the road or something. Because when he pulls into that gas station, almost immediately, a police vehicle pulls up right beside him, and they don't waste any time. They get out of the car, they open fire on Gabriel. He is shot multiple times. I mean, he's probably dead at this point, but they pull him out of the car. They handcuff him while he's like dead on the ground. And they just kind of let him bleed out on the pavement. And he's dead. That's the end of it. And the police do another tweet, and they say that Gabriel has been caught. And, I mean, that's the end of his rampage. All in all, there was 22 people in total that were killed. 3 others were injured. One of the women was pregnant, so her unborn baby was killed as well. And all of this happened throughout 13 hours. So that's the end. Scary. But there's still so many questions about why this was such a shit show. Any final thoughts?
It's just so crazy. And yeah, I don't know. It's just like kind of, and it's very unusual, like a mass shooting, because normally, you know, mass shooting would happen, you know, in one location most of the time, right? Where it's this one, it's like he literally drove throughout the province in different little communities and shot people throughout the whole. And it's wild to think. And the fact that the RCMP, he really, I'm trying to think of what the saying is, but he really did, you know, he knew, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but he really caught them. What's the saying? Like, he really caught them with their pants down. Like, they really didn't know, they weren't equipped, and he probably knew that, and he just, you know, was able to escape while they were all trying to figure out what to do. And they just, the fact that they were outmatched by one person when they had multiple people, you know, it's really sad.
He's pretty brazen to go and get stopped for gas. The Elmsdale gas station is pretty busy. It's one of the busier ones on that highway. So for him to stop to get gas is pretty brazen of him, knowing what he just done.
But I feel like he had no choice.
Well, I guess, yeah.
I feel like he had no gas.
True.
But yeah, luckily they were fucking paying attention finally and caught him. But yeah, I'm thinking like, and all the people he attacked were, like, it was all very personal because it was his neighbors in that little community that he knew. He could have very easily gone to, like, a busier city. Like, he could have started in Halifax and shot up the streets. Instead, he went to that little town where it was personal to him. So it seems like just something snapped, but it doesn't really make sense, like, what happened to make him kind of go over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was thinking, like, if he did get away from the police after getting gas, like, he was headed towards Halifax, so God knows what he could have done when he got here. Like, his mission probably wasn't over. He was probably still gonna shoot up anybody he saw, like, on the highway or towards Halifax. So kind of good in a way that he's where he stopped, because you never know what could have happened if he kept on going.
Oh yeah, I feel like he would never have stopped until he got caught.
Mm-hmm. Well, wasn't his plan like to go to his denturist office and burn it down too? Like, wasn't that, or maybe that hasn't been confirmed, but that's what I was going around, was that like he was planning to go to his denturist office and do that. But
maybe that makes sense, I guess, because he was headed that way.
And that's like right down in downtown Dartmouth, like right in the smack dab middle of Dartmouth. So a lot of damage could have been done if he decided that's where he was headed to.
And obviously, I mean, it seems that he had been planning something like this for, I mean, is that the conclusion? I feel like he was planning it because he did collect the RCMP vehicles, so it's like he doesn't necessarily, like, was he doing it for this reason, or he just like was collecting them and he was kind of, you know, enamored with RCMP or whatever, and then he was just thought it was an afterthought, like, oh, I can use this to kind of go undetected? Or do you think that it really was sort of this intricate thing where he thought, okay, I'm gonna like do this just for this sole purpose? Because I can't really decide if maybe, you know, he was just collecting them because he liked them, which is still weird. But
I don't know, I feel like maybe he didn't care, but I mean, I'm sure it's completely legal to have a replica RCMP car that you've made yourself just kind of sitting in on your property. So I feel like he wasn't just going to make it to have it, because he would have got in trouble. It would have got taken away if he got found out. So I think he made it so that he could get away with something.
And he obviously did have like the guns and the firearms to be able to do it too. And it just seemed like he had a very, you know, he knew the routes. Although I guess he lived there, so it's not that hard to know the routes out. But it just seemed like he kind of knew like where their weak spots would be, like how he could escape undetected, and how all of that kind of happened. I just feel like it's not just a spur of the moment. He was in a rage and then he's like thought to do this. I feel like maybe he had planned to do something like this, just didn't know necessarily when. But then when he got in that violent rage, it's like, okay, this is the time. Because I don't know. It just seems like everything, although the RCMP did screw up a lot, so maybe just they screwed up so much that it made it look like he had a plan, but really they just made it very easy for him to be able to do it.
Maybe. But I feel like he did have a little bit of a plan, because it's not like he hit every single house on the way. He skipped some and went to certain houses of people that knew him for sure. So he definitely had something to prove to these people. I don't know whether he was mad or he just lost it. Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever know how long he was planning or what his actual motivations were.
And it seems like it took very little for him to actually go off the deep end. I mean, that little comment by that person, that friend he was chatting with from Maine, or like the argument that he had with Lisa about that, like obviously it was building up to that, because that doesn't seem like a huge significant argument, you know? So it's just crazy. Like obviously he was already at the brink already.
It's like I was saying, that's when COVID was first hitting, so maybe something was going on with that, because reportedly he was like stocking up on gas. Maybe that was just so he could light all these houses on fire, but it seemed like he was stocking up on gas because when COVID hit he would need it. And he stocked up on like a bunch of rice and like staples and stuff. So maybe he was just worried about the pandemic, like actually worried about it. And that was a stressor as well. Maybe because the businesses were shutting down and stuff.
It could have been because at the beginning of the pandemic, if it was anything like a non-emergency thing, like dentist office, they all got shut down. So I'm guessing that he would have been forced to close his denture office. And he probably, I don't know, that may have kind of pissed him off. It could have been some other sort of underlying issues, you know. Yeah,
that's true. And I did read a few articles saying that people had said that he was very, stressed or very, anxious about COVID. And he was, that could have been something that just added on to his stress that he already had. So it's kind of like he was already at the brink and then COVID just kind of pushed him over the edge. Because this is April of 2020, right? So literally the things had just closed like a couple of weeks before, in mid-March. So, or maybe a month before. So it was really at the beginning when everyone was kind of everything was sort of uncertain and stuff. So
yeah, so maybe he was stressed about that. And like I was saying before, he really didn't have a lot of friends because he was just this weird guy. And so maybe that comment when that person, said don't commit to him and run, basically, he was thinking maybe he was going to lose the only real friend that he actually had, like his partner. So that put him over the edge. Like, that seems plausible as well. Obviously, nothing justifies what happened, and nothing can explain it to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, nothing makes sense in this situation.
Yeah. Like I said, there's probably things that were kind of adding up all at once that kind of just pushed him over the edge. And it was just, and he did have violent tendencies before. I mean, from the articles I read, stuff about the inquiry that came out, like it's not like he wasn't known to be a violent person in the past. So he was somebody that had that tendency. So I guess all of this just all added together to push him to this, which is crazy. So yeah, now that we kind of have the timeline a little bit, so this is where we're going to end part 1, and then in part 2 we're just going to continue our conversation, talk a little bit about the inquiry into the RCMP that resulted from this, so we'll get a little bit into that in part 2. So thank you so much for listening to part 1, and we hope you are enjoying our discussion of this case. So yeah, definitely join us. Part 2 is going to be coming out today as well, so keep on listening, and yeah, we'll see you on part 2. So thank you for listening so far, and yeah, take care. We'll see you in part 2.